everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services virtual public information meeting for the Red Wolf Recovery Program updates. We're going to give folks a few minutes here to join the meeting, and then we'll begin the PowerPoint presentation shortly, so please stay tuned. I do want to note that closed captioning is available by selecting the live transcript button on your Zoom toolbar and then selecting Show Subtitles. Thanks for your patience as we give folks a few minutes here to join. Again, welcome everyone to tonight's meeting. We're going to give folks a few more minutes to join the meeting, so please stay tuned and we'll start the presentation shortly. Again, I do want to note that closed captioning is available by selecting the live transcript icon on your Zoom toolbar and then selecting Show Subtitles. We'll just give it one more minute here for folks to join. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. We'll move to the next slide, please. Again, hello everyone. We'll get started with our meeting tonight. I'd like to thank you all for joining us. We appreciate your time and participation. My name is Megan Stone with AECOM, a contractor for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and I'm going to be one of your meeting facilitators tonight. Additionally, I have several members of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service with me on the meeting who will be introduced in a moment. On the screen, we have our expected agenda. I'll first go over some brief ground rules for this evening's meeting. The service will provide PowerPoint presentations on the Red Wolf Management Program updates. After the first presentation, we'll pause to answer any questions you might have on the material presented. We'll then move into our second presentation. After the second presentation, we'll take a quick 5-minute break. And then the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service will hold a second question and answer session to respond to any questions you might have on the second presentation. The service will then provide some closing remarks and we'll close out the meeting around 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Next slide, please. Before we get started with the presentation, I'll go over some ground rules for the meeting. First, this meeting is being recorded as part of the project record, and a recording will be posted to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service website. It does take some time to get that posted on the website, but it will be posted, and we'll provide information on that later. Second, your microphones and videos will be turned off for the duration of the meeting today. Third, questions will be addressed during the question and answer sessions after each of the PowerPoint presentations. We'll do our best to address the questions in the order they come in to allow everyone an opportunity to voice their questions tonight. Again, after our first presentation by Emily Well, we'll pause to answer any questions related to that presentation before moving on to our second presentation by Joe Madison. And then there will be a second opportunity to submit electronic questions after our 5-minute break. If you would like to ask a question at any point, you can type your question in the Zoom chat feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And we do want to note that questions submitted as part of registration do not need to be resubmitted. We have a list of these questions and the service has used them when developing the presentations for this meeting. However, if the presentations haven't addressed some of those pre-registered questions, we will save a little time to address those at the end of the meeting. With that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Emily Weller with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for introductions.
There we go. I think I'm off mute now. Sorry about that. Good evening, everyone. My name is Emily Weller, and I am the Fish and Wildlife Service Red Wolf Recovery Program Coordinator. Before we get started on our presentation today, I just wanted to take a moment to thank you for joining us tonight. We understand how busy your lives are and your schedules are, so we really appreciate that you've taken time to be here. Your presence tonight is important to the ongoing work of the Red Wolf Recovery Program and our mission to work with others to conserve, protect, and enhance the endangered red wolf. It was just a few years ago, the red wolf population was at the lowest it has been since 1987, when we first reintroduced these animals into North Carolina. America's red wolf, an animal of cultural importance to Native American tribes and others across the country, the most endangered wolf species in the world. We had to act. We knew we had to change. And as a result of that, we revitalized this program, taking a hard look at our past successes and shortcomings. We found clear successes. We can reintroduce red wolves into the wild. They can survive, they can breed, they can thrive. But we also found areas where we fell short. Reintroducing a large carnivore into the wild had never been done before. And the focus of this program in the beginning was almost entirely biological. But the social aspects, the community engagement and human dimensions, those were the cracks in our program's foundation. And these cracks had an impact. Now, I do want to clarify that this is not to criticize in any way those who came before me, before all of us. They were pioneers in uncharted territory. But now we know more, and we are taking those lessons to build a stronger future in this program. Today, we remain committed to the same mission, just with a different approach, one that integrates social science and human dimensions into wildlife conservation. And that's collaborative conservation. And while this isn't a new concept, we recognize that in order to ensure the survival of the red wolf, we needed to change the way we operated. So while we continue to rely on proven wildlife management techniques and explore innovative approaches to the challenges we face, as well as the threats that the species faces, we now know that in order for this program to be successful, we must address the people side of the equation. That's why we've adopted a collaborative conservation approach, emphasizing the importance of community engagement, transparent communication, and partnerships. We have to work hand in hand with state wildlife agencies, local communities, landowners, NGOs, and many others. We have to strengthen the foundation of the Red Wolf Recovery Program, because what we do now in North Carolina will shape the future of red wolf populations in other areas as well. So our goal is not just to meet biological targets, but to build the trust and social acceptance needed to make lasting change. And by addressing anthropogenic threats and values, we can ensure the future survival of America's red wolf. And as I looked at tonight's registration list, I saw many familiar names and many that I'm not familiar with. We have participants from all over the country, and that just shows how broad the interest and support for this mission is. So we're eager to hear your thoughts, your questions, and insights, as public feedback is a critical part of shaping our future efforts. So as you listen to our updates tonight, know that while we still face challenges and change can be slow, progress is being made, and there is a great deal of hope for the future. And by working with others, we will build a future where this iconic species thrives once more. So I think with that, we can go move into our updates, our presentation. Again, thank you for joining us. I'm just going to pull up my presentation here. So before actually we get into the program updates, you can change the slide, please. Next slide. Before we get into the updates, I want to talk about our Red Wolf Recovery Program team. We are a relatively small group, but a very mighty and passionate group. There's me, again, the Red Wolf Recovery Program Coordinator. We also have our field team, and there we have our North Carolina Program Manager, Joe Madison, who's going to present a little bit later. We have 3 field biologists, a Partners for Fish and Wildlife biologists, and typically we have 1 to 2 interns onboarded at any given time. Now, we are growing. We just recently hired a wildlife biologist to join our field biologists. They will be starting soon, and we are working on hiring a community engagement specialist. Now, we do not work in a vacuum. We get plenty of support from other programs in the service. Our public affairs specialist in our Office of Communication, Jennifer Coaches, she helps us with media inquiries, website updates, press releases, all of those. We work closely with our Raleigh Ecological Services field office, refuges, our social scientists, and law enforcement. So a lot of support from other programs in the service. Next slide, please. So to get us started, I'm going to give a super abridged history of the Red Wolf and the program for those of you who may not be familiar. So at one time, the Red Wolf was common throughout eastern and south central United States. You can see the yellow on the map there. But by early 20th century, the population of red wolves had been decimated due to intensive predator control programs and habitat degradation and alteration. It was one of the first species to be listed and receive federal protection under the Endangered Species Preservation Act of 1966. That is the precursor to the ESA. It was listed as threatened with extinction in 1967. Now, by 1972, the range was limited to a small coastal area along southeast Texas and southwest Louisiana. That's the red area on the map. In 1973, in anticipation of the Endangered Species Act and to prevent extinction of the species, the service established a formal recovery program and began trapping canids in this Texas-Louisiana area to establish a red wolf captive breeding program, or population under human care, with the intention of returning the species to the wild within its historic range. With the passage of the Endangered Species Act in 1973, the red wolf was listed as an endangered species. Now, after trapping canids in this area between 1973 and 1980, to remove the last of the red wolves to prevent its extinction, we declared it extinct in the wild in 1980. By 1987, the population under human care had grown enough to reintroduce them into the wild. They were reintroduced into eastern North Carolina as a non-essential experimental population. I want to clarify, because we get a lot of questions about this, the term non-essential is just a legal definition or a term under the ESA, and it's not reflective of the value of that population. Experimental populations have a designated geographic scope, and this one includes 5 counties on the Albemarle Peninsula. That's Dare, Hyde, Terrell, Washington, and Beaufort. Now, one of the really interesting things about this program is that it was the first of its kind, the first to reintroduce a large carnivore into the wild. This was 8 years before the well-known 1995 reintroduction of gray wolves into Yellowstone. Our red wolf biologists and our partners pioneered innovative management techniques that have been used by other reintroduction programs and are standard practices today. This program really paved the way for other reintroduction programs. Now, today, the eastern North Carolina red wolf population is our only wild population of red wolves, and Joe will talk about that population in more detail. Next slide, please. We had several questions submitted asking about our plans, goals, timelines, next steps. We do have a plan, the revised Red Wolf Recovery Plan that we published a year ago. This is our guiding document, our roadmap to recovery, and I think going through this will really help answer that question. Next slide, please. So in this plan, we've outlined the strategy of how to get from the species' current state to the state of it being recovered and no longer needing the protection of the ESA. So the first part of this strategy is to expand distribution of the species. That's establishing additional populations in areas of adequate habitat, ideally different habitat that will support multiple packs. Now at this time, we don't have additional population locations identified, and I will speak to that more later as we had several questions on that topic as well. Now, the second part of the strategy is to increase the population abundance and maintain genetic diversity long term. We need a robust population under human care to support the establishment of wild populations and maintain gene diversity long term. Establishing and growing populations, that's going to require releases, pup fostering, translocation of wild red wolves within and among wild populations and propagation sites, and adaptive management, which is coyote sterilization. Excuse me. But for red wolf populations to ultimately be viable, be successful, they can't be reliant on extensive human interventions, which we define as annual or frequent releases, pup fostering, translocations, and the placeholder management, that coyote sterilization. But to further increase population numbers, maintain genetic diversity, and eliminate the need for extensive human interventions, threats to the red wolf, both under human care and the wild, must be adequately addressed to ensure survival, growth, and long-term viability. Now, the third part of this strategy is implementing collaborative conservation. This was a major focus of the recovery team. It's a critical component of the recovery plan, and as I said, it is a focus of the recovery program. We cannot recover this species alone. We can achieve better conservation through partnerships, and each party has a role to play and unique perspectives that will make red wolf recovery possible. Also, looking at the patchwork of landowners in the Southeast and that federal ownership is less than 10%, we have to work with others in order for these populations to be successful. This is particularly true for landowners and other community members, as they are the backbone of conservation and have the most direct bearing on recovery, since they are the ones that live with red wolves. This collaborative conservation part is critical to implementing and achieving the other parts of the strategy and being successful. We have to engage the various parties, or contributors as we refer to them in the recovery plan, and incorporate the various perspectives and values into recovery efforts. We have to give contributors a voice. Having a voice leads to acceptance, and acceptance is needed to minimize threats to a level that will allow the species to persist without extensive human interventions. But this type of engagement requires establishing trust or rebuilding trust, building a true partnership, which includes having a shared understanding among all contributors regarding goals, objectives, roles, responsibilities, and expectations. Next slide, please. So the recovery criteria, these are objective, measurable thresholds or targets that, when met, would result in a determination to delist the species, which means it no longer meets the definition of a threatened or endangered species under the Endangered Species Act and no longer warrants the ESA protections. This is what we're aiming for, and if we follow our strategy, we will meet these criteria. So criteria 1, we need 3 viable populations distributed to maximize redundancy. Redundancy is needed to protect the species from catastrophic loss. It reduces the likelihood that all populations will be affected simultaneously. Criterion 2, Each red wolf population meets the following criteria for viability. One of the 3 populations consists of at least 180 individuals. The other 2 populations consist of a minimum of 280 individuals each. At least 80% of current and future founder gene diversity has been maintained. Once the population meets that minimum abundance, the population is stable or growing for a period of 10 years without extensive human interventions. And then each population has a 95% probability of persistence for 100 years. And then finally, criterion 3, adequate mechanisms or long-term commitments are in place that provide a high level of certainty that criteria 2 for each population will be maintained into the foreseeable future without the protections of the Act. So we have the number of populations needed, the criteria that each population needs to meet, and mechanisms in place to ensure those criteria can be maintained into the foreseeable future, which gets at the definition of a threatened species under the ESA, or rather not meeting that definition so that the species can be delisted. Next slide, please. So there is a lot on this screen. I apologize. This was the only way I could think of to get all the actions on one slide. So I'll read through those while I talk, but these are the recovery actions. Recovery actions are site-specific actions that are needed to meet the criteria. And these are a reflection of the strategy. So we have 16 total here, 12 apply to all populations, 4 are specific to North Carolina. As you read through them, I'll just quickly say they range from engaging states in a process to identify potential sites, building teams, developing plans, adaptive management, outreach, engagement, school programs, assessing adequacy of management and long-term commitments, revising the recovery plan to include future sites, habitat restoration, reducing threats, and increasing law enforcement presence. These are the things that need to be done, not only by the service, but other partner agencies and organizations. And they have priorities assigned to them. Most of them are high priority, priority 1. Some of these can be done simultaneously. Others may need to be implemented before moving on and starting other actions. Now, each of these actions has a time estimate associated with it, but that is how long we expect it will take to carry out that action, not a timeline of when actions should be implemented. Some actions may be short, like a year. Others go the entire length of the estimated recovery time. The plan also includes time and cost estimates, which is just how they sound. Estimates of the time it will take to achieve recovery and the cost of implementing the actions. So altogether, we estimate delisting criteria can be achieved in approximately 50 years. We also estimate that this can be achieved with just under 328 million. Now I realize that is a big number, but recovery of a large species not only takes time, it takes money. But it's important to note that this is not just federal funding. This includes in-kind contributions, funding from other agencies and organizations, and it covers everything from salaries of staff, federal and non-federal, travel, contracts for services, printing services, everything down to purchasing equipment like traps, collars, vehicles. Next slide, please. Now the recovery plan isn't it. The next step in recovery is a recovery implementation strategy. And in September 2023, just almost exactly a year ago, some of the recovery team members met in person to work on developing that implementation strategy. And what that is an operations plan that steps down the actions and the recovery plan to more detailed activities. The implementation strategy is a playbook. Any organization, agency, individual can take a look at that strategy and determine where they may fit based on their interests, expertise, resources, etc. This document should spark more collaboration, and we are hoping to make this available soon. It is in draft. Next slide, please. Okay, so we have a plan. We have actions that we need to take and soon activities to implement those actions. Where do we start? What are the next steps? The following are some of the key actions that the recovery program will be focused on in the coming year or longer. That's not to say that we aren't working on other things, but these are some of the big actions that we need to take to move forward. First, like I said, and by we, I mean me, need to finalize the implementation strategy, as this is an important source of collaboration. My goal is to have it available to the public this winter. Next, we will continue to focus on our North Carolina population, managing and increasing that in Eastern North Carolina red wolf population, which Joe is going to speak about. But part of that is our recent formation of a North Carolina red wolf team and working with the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission to collaboratively implement red wolf and other canine management concurrently throughout the Eastern North Carolina red wolf population area. We will also continue to assist our SAFE partners in increasing space so that the SAFE population continues to grow. And we have heavily invested in conservation conflict transformation so that we can get to a place of collaborative conservation. And working on this is critical to so many other actions, most of them, I would say. And then last but not least, we will be working on identifying new reintroduction sites because, well, one population is not enough. Next slide, please. So to begin with, the North Carolina Red Wolf team. This was a priority 1 recovery action in the recovery plan. We stated in that recovery plan that we would establish Red Wolf teams at each reintroduction site to facilitate a shared understanding regarding cooperation needed for successful recovery. This is an important to success given differences in agency missions, statutory authorities, expertise, cultures, and constituency expectations. We anticipate Red Wolf teams would consist of at least service and state representatives. This action hits directly on being collaborative and is very different than how we've operated in the past. We envision this team would develop with other contributors strategies to address threats and recover the red wolf at each of those sites. This team could also regularly review recovery progress, make recommendations as needed, address conflicts, engage with hunting, trapping, and wildlife conservation groups to promote transparency, collaboration, and partnerships, and collaboratively develop strategies and recommendations for long-term population viability and post-delisting monitoring assistance. Right now, we are working on a memorandum of understanding to establish this team and really outline how we are going to work together. Next slide, please. One of our ongoing focuses is to assist with increasing the SAFE population. That's the captive breeding program or the population under human care that was started in the 70s. SAFE is Saving Animals from Extinction and is an association of zoos and aquariums program. Because the SAFE population is the genetic fail-safe for the species and it is critical to supporting the establishment of wild populations, one of our priorities is to ensure that population is robust, which means increasing breeding capability so that the population can increase and hit our target. Our SAFE partners are amazing. Today, the population and the number of partner facilities is higher than it's ever been. There are 267 red wolves in the SAFE population and 50 partner zoos and wildlife centers across the country. They've been able to maintain 88% of the genetic diversity of the 12 founders. Historically, whelping success has been around 20 to 25%, but in the last 2 years, that success rate has been 45 and 38%. Pup survival also increased this past year. It was 80%, where historically it has been around 65%. Now, there are 122 spaces dedicated to red wolves, which equals a capacity of about 280 to 300 red wolves. Now, based on a population viability analysis, the goal is to reach 400 in the SAFE population. So they need approximately 50 new spaces to accommodate that 400 total. Now, someone asked if we would be interested in working with tribes or tribal members in various states to provide captive breeding sites. Yes, we need new partners. Feel free to contact me. I'll be happy to help set up a discussion with SAFE to talk about requirements, options, resources, and get that conversation started. We were also asked, what do these institutions do, and is it helpful? So the short answer is a lot, and yes, absolutely, it is helpful. The Red Wolf Safe program supports recovery by providing Red Wolves that are behaviorally fit for recovery, increasing capacity and population so that they can support multiple wild populations, and then providing audiences with knowledge, empathy, and resources to have a positive impact on recovery. They go beyond just breeding. They recently completed a 5-year action plan that directly supports the Red Wolf Recovery Plan. Zoos and wildlife centers are often the first source of information or awareness for the public. They're trusted messengers of wildlife conservation and environmental issues. They can educate millions of visitors each year about endangered species and conservation-related issues. We cannot do that. Many of these institutions are conducting vital research to improve the health of the safe population. So they bring a wealth of resources and expertise to the table, and they are critical to recovery. Next slide, please. Now, as I mentioned before, we're embracing a new philosophy, right? Collaborative conservation. The way we operated in the past did not serve us well. The people part of the equation was missing, and our relationships with different agencies, NGOs, the local community, and landowners was not good. This is critical to not only how we, the service, operate, but it's foundational to implementing the recovery strategy, recovery actions, the implementation strategy, and ultimately achieving the recovery criteria. But how do we collaborate, communicate, and engage with those various agencies, organizations, the community that we have had so much conflict and distrust with? We have to overcome that conflict so that we can collaborate. And that's one of our biggest challenges. We have invested, excuse me, in conservation conflict transformation. What that is about improving relationships and changing that destructive conflict that prevents open communication and trust, sucks up energy and resources, hinders progress into something that's more productive so that we can move forward together. It's engaging other agencies, organizations, the community, and processes related to Red Wolf recovery and giving them a voice, and creating a process that is fair, legitimate, and inclusive. It's addressing the people part of the equation. So we contracted with Constructive Conflict and are working with Francine Madden and Kim Wolfenden on this in the 5-county Eastern North Carolina population area. We have contracted with them, but they do not work for us. They are a third-party neutral that works for all entities equally. And what this approach is meant to do is just directly address the issues around red wolves, while also reconciling and transforming deeper rooted conflicts that have enabled and inflamed destructive conflict. We are now in year 2 of a 3-year contract. Our 3rd year begins in December. Next slide. So some of the goals and outcomes of this CCT process is improved trust, transparency, communication, and operational functioning within the service, and then among the service, states, NGOs, local partners, the community, and others. Improved perceptions of and relationships among and within these various groups. Improved intergroup alignment and functioning, as well as intergroup functioning and capacity for shared problem solving. A positive ripple effect of increased shared problem solving capacity and motivation. How the conflict over red wolves in North Carolina is addressed, no matter what the outcome is, will have a significant ripple effect for red wolf recovery elsewhere. And that ripple could be positive or negative, just depending on the process and the outcome. And last, involved individuals and entities possess the capacity to continually anticipate and prevent destructive conflict and address emerging challenges and transform conflict as it arises. Skill building. So this is going to be done through 3 tasks. Task 1 is assessing conflict. The link on the screen here will take you to the report, which was completed earlier this year. This report is an overview of the perspectives of the various groups, which includes the local Albemarle Peninsula community, Red Wolf Advocacy Community, North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission, and the service. At least 155 individuals were interviewed for this report. In that report, it identifies common ground, areas of divergence, and next steps. Now, task 2 is building capacity within the Fish and Wildlife Service and other groups to support transformation of internal and external conflict around red wolves and improve alignment, cooperation, and productivity. So this task is ongoing. The service held an internal CCT workshop a year ago. In March 2024, a workshop was held between the service and various NGOs. I have said this at the meeting. I've said it in other presentations since that meeting. I will say it now, and I will probably say it whenever I get the chance. We had decades of conflict in that room, disagreements, probably not saying the best things about other organizations and agencies, history full of litigation. But the people in that room recognize the need for change and want to change. And I think there's agreement that we have to change. It's the only way we can make progress on recovery. And I don't think the significance of that cannot be overstated. This was a game changer. And I think we will look back on this as a pivotal moment for recovery. And from that workshop, we developed a NGO Fish and Wildlife Service collaboration group to work together more effectively and more efficiently to have a greater effect on recovery. Now, task 3, integrating CCT into existing and new processes. This is just using CCT to change how we operate, reconcile relationships, and align individuals and groups toward that shared goal and begin the shared problem solving. Both the assessment, which is task 1, and the capacity building and alignment, task 2, will build receptivity and capacity for this task 3. This is same side engagement, which is ongoing. The bringing of the various groups together into a multi-party engagement process is anticipated to begin this fall or winter. Now, we were asked what the team had learned through going through the CCT process the past couple of years. I can't speak for everyone, but I don't think there were any real surprises in the report in regards to the different perspectives. However, going through the workshop really helped me to step back and try to see other perspectives and the source or factors that play into that perspective. And this process itself has been really good at opening up opportunities to have better discussions and really has helped us to see how important those discussions really are. And that is a great first step. We have already seen significant progress. Like I said, the relationship with the NGOs and our relationship with North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission is better than it's been in years. Next slide. So another priority, and one that we received many questions about, is identifying potential new reintroduction sites. One population obviously isn't enough, and we've determined that we need 3 total. But the service has not done any analyses yet, so no sites have been identified. Now, you're probably asking why. It seems like a pretty important step, and you're correct. But the service cannot go through that process, that analysis, and then announce, hey, state A and B, you have been identified as the most suitable site for red wolves. Now, come join us. Let's work together to establish a new population. That will not work. It's important for state wildlife agencies to be vested partners working alongside us early in the process. Now, we outlined in the recovery plan that we will develop with state wildlife agencies criteria for and identifying all potentially ecologically and socially suitable reintroduction sites that could potentially support a viable population. Now, once potential sites are identified, we would further engage state wildlife agencies and others to determine final locations. Now, the timeline on this, I will be taking some of those first steps starting next month to get the identification process started. How long will that entire process take down to the final locations? I'm not certain. There is a balance that needs to be struck between getting new sites identified so that we can move forward with establishing a new population. and taking time to have the necessary discussions and input to get the support a program like this needs from the beginning. Now, my best guess for getting red wolves on the ground and in a new population, maybe 4 to 6 years. That gives time for the identification process, the safe population to increase and be able to support a second wild population, and time for the right groundwork to be laid to support, to gain that support prior to any releases. Next slide, please. Now, we received several questions about red wolves in Louisiana, the Gulf Coast canids, red wolf ancestry remaining on the landscape in this area, so I will address those. So in case you are not familiar, over the last several years, studies have found red wolf ancestry persists in wild canids in the Texas and Louisiana area, where the last of the red wolves were thought to have been removed in the 70s to start the captive breeding program. This ancestry is known red wolf ancestry, meaning these canids share alleles with the original founder red wolves used to establish that program, their descendants, and the reintroduced Eastern North Carolina red wolf population. These studies also have found Gulf Coast canid populations may carry red wolf ghost alleles. These are alleles that are absent from any other North American canid source population: coyote, gray wolf, eastern wolf, and dog, and including known red wolves. These ghost alleles are thought to be alleles lost or just not captured when those red wolves were removed in the 70s. These studies are ongoing. So, what does that mean? At this time, it is not clear if these Gulf Coast canids are red wolves. We know that there have been questions and concerns from the public in this area, particularly if red wolves are found to be present. How is that going to affect their land and what they can do on their land? And there are a lot of what ifs in trying to answer these questions, particularly any questions regarding potential regulations. But if any of these Gulf Coast canids were determined to be red wolves, they would receive full protection of the ESA as a federally protected species. So killing and harming a red wolf, among other actions, would be prohibited. However, private land is critical in conservation and recovery. Landowners and other community members, like I said before, are the backbone of conservation because they have the most direct bearing on recovery. So it will be critical for the service and state wildlife agencies to work collaboratively with landowners and the local community to consider and incorporate their needs into any recovery plans and management actions. Now, one person asked if the genes from the Galveston Island ghost wolves can be introduced into the recovery population, and if not, why not? And I appreciate this question because it gives me the opportunity to address a couple of things there. First, I do not use the term ghost wolves. I've talked to the researchers about my concerns with this term, so I don't mind bringing it up here. My first concern is that if you call something a ghost wolf, a Gulf Coast wolf, a Weller wolf, what are people going to think that animal is? A wolf. And we just don't know yet what those animals are. Even if those lost alleles are red wolf, that doesn't necessarily make them a wolf. And I want to be fair to the communities and the landowners in these Gulf Coast areas where these canids are being studied and not call them something until we know what they are. Now, the other part of this question, can these genes be introduced into the recovery population? The answer at this time is no, because we don't know yet that these are red wolf alleles and we don't know what these canids are. If the ghost alleles are determined to be red wolf alleles, whether the canids are determined to be red wolves or not, there would be a discussion about the best course of action. For example, if they should or should not be introduced and how. There could be policy implications to consider. It would need to be a very well thought through and well informed decision process, which with the research that we have going on, we would have that information. Now, another asked if the population of the Galveston Island coyotes is decreasing or increasing. I reached out to the researchers working in that area for information on this one. At this time, there's no quantitative population estimate, but based on sampling and reporting of observations, the population seems stable. Next slide, please. So in summary, we have a new approach. And while we don't focus on the past, we are learning from the past so that we do things differently. Not only to be successful again in North Carolina, but to start new populations differently than before. And this is the only way we're going to be successful. We have a new guide to recovering the red wolf. With the finalization of the implementation strategy, I hope for greater collaboration to really move the needle on recovery. We will continue managing and growing the Eastern North Carolina red wolf population and working with the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission as the North Carolina red wolf team to implement additional actions for recovery of the population in North Carolina. Because as the population grows, not only are we moving towards that minimum abundance, but the Eastern North Carolina population could be a source of translocations to support a new population site in the future. We will continue to support efforts to increase the safe population so that it can continue to support releases and pup fostering in North Carolina and grow to a level that can support more wild populations. We are working on collaborative conservation and using conflict transformation to address the need to engage and collaborate with entities where we've had a lot of conflict and distrust. We have dedicated a lot of time to this. It's ongoing. It's hard. It's a difficult process, but hopefully a rewarding one. It has been so far. And I have hope that it is going to get us where we need to be in the future. And finally, we will be working on identifying potential new reintroduction sites so that we can establish new population with state wildlife agencies as vested partners, starting the program on the right foot. Now, to wrap up my part of this, someone asked if we had a 10-year goal. And it's hard to say because there's so many factors that come into play and circumstances seem to always be changing. But in 10 years, if we've addressed the social issues, the people part, we've rebuilt trust, built true partnerships, we've addressed the greatest threats, the Eastern North Carolina population should be significantly higher. The safe population would be close to hitting the 400 mark if they haven't done so already. By then, a second population, excuse me, a second population could be started with a red wolf team created, possibly a third started or close to being started, depending on whether the safe population and the Eastern North Carolina population could support that. But at the very least, a red wolf team for that population is formed and functioning. I would hope too that within 10 years, America's red wolf, a culturally significant species, is a household name across the country. And now with that, I will turn it back over to you, Megan.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you for that presentation. We'll go ahead and now pause to answer any questions folks might have on Emily's presentation. Again, after we answer questions on this first presentation, we'll pass it over to Joe Madison for the second presentation of the evening. And there will be another opportunity to submit electronic questions at that point. But for now, I'll go ahead and provide a reminder of how you can submit questions. I do see that we have a few questions folks submitted in the chat box, and it seems like for the most part, Emily addressed those in her presentation, but we will see if we missed any. But with that, we'll go ahead and just remind you that you can submit questions through the chat feature. So on the screen here, you can see the chat icon. This can be found at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You may have to wave your mouse back and forth over the bottom of your Zoom screen to get that toolbar to appear. You can then click the chat box and type your question in and send it to hosts and panelists. We'll get an alert that we've got that question, and we'll work our way through questions in the order that they are received. We'll spend a little bit of time answering questions here, and then, like I said, we'll move on to our next presentation. If anybody needs any Zoom technical support at any time, please feel free to also use that chat feature to get in contact with us, and we'll have a Zoom technician help you. So with that, we'll give it a moment and see if we have some more questions coming in. And again, we ask that you keep questions related to this first presentation, as we'll have another one coming up next. Please do listen to questions asked by others and the services responses in case your question is asked by another attendee and responded to. And then just one more brief reminder that if you submitted a question during registration, no need to submit that again. We do have a list of those and we'll work our way through those. Thanks everyone for your patience as the questions load. All right, we do have some questions coming in here. Our first question is, how can we reach out and get involved in the selection process for additional sites? It looks like you're muted, Emily.
You always remind yourselves to not do that, and then you do it anyway. That's a good question. Where I will be starting are with the state agencies. That is what we outlined in the recovery plan. I have no idea what the process is going to be like. I need state agencies to help me develop that process. So if there's an opportunity to involve more in that process, we would provide that as an update in one of these public information meetings. We would get information out. So I don't have a great answer for you, except that if that becomes an option, we will reach out. And I'm sure the states have contacts. We would reach out through our contacts or through this public information meeting.
Great, thank you, Emily. We do have quite a few questions popping up in the chat, so we'll try to get through some of these. All right. One of our next questions is, if the ghost alleles you mentioned aren't red wolf, do we have an idea of what they might be?
No, I do not. I will be quite honest. I am not a geneticist. I think those who are working on this feel pretty strongly that they are red wolf, but without further testing or without the analyses that they're currently working on, I don't have an answer for what they could possibly be if not red wolf.
Thank you, Emily. All right, I think you touched on this one, but we'll see if you have anything to add. Has the recovery program criteria about population goals always been the criteria, or have these goals been recently made / modified?
Can you read that again? I want to make sure I caught the first part of that correctly.
Of course. Has the recovery program criteria about population goals always been the criteria, or have those goals been recently made or modified?
So I believe in the original, actually, there's been 3 recovery plans before this one, but the last one, the one that was last updated in 1990, it did have some population goals, but the ones that we have now, they have been modified and updated. So there have been population goals in the past. These are certainly updated ones.
All right. Thank you, Emily. Looks like we've gotten a few questions that are really great questions that will be answered in the next presentation. We also had a question, will this presentation be available to rewatch? This presentation, the entire meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service website later on. So that will be made available to the public. And we'll go ahead and see if we have time to answer any more of these. Otherwise, the rest we will save for Joe to answer during his presentation. All right. One question we had here that we'll pass to Joe is, are there good resources to monitor to keep an eye on the latest and greatest on red wolf studies and recovery efforts?
Are you wanting me to answer that now? The best resource is from the Red Wolf standpoint for the updates on, the population, that kind of stuff, is the Red Wolf Recovery page, Red Wolf Recovery Program page. The easiest way to remember how to get there is it's Red Wolf Recovery, redwolfcountry.com is the easy way. There's a much longer title for it, the actual thing. But there's also the Red Wolf Coalition has a resource library on their website that has all of the research and studies that are going on for red wolves and those things that have been published. So that's also an excellent resource to keep up on things. So those are 2 really good resources for that.
All right, thank you both. With that, we've gotten through all of the questions that are related to Emily's presentation that we can answer at this point. If there's any questions we didn't get to, we will follow up separately about those. And with that, we'll go ahead and pass it over to Joe for his presentation.
Thanks, Megan. As Emily mentioned, my name is Joe Madison. I am the North Carolina Program Manager for the Red Wolf Recovery Program and a wildlife biologist on the program. I have been in that position for a little bit shy of 8 years now. And so it's been an interesting 8 years, as anybody that follows red wolves know. Next slide. But I want to talk about the team because it's a huge part of this. As Emily said, we're kind of a small group and we do a lot, but it's a very small but dedicated crew. Ryan Nordsman specifically, he's been here for 19 years. So, I've dealt with a lot of ups and downs in 8 years. You guys know what Ryan has dealt with for 19 years. So valuable information resource for me, institutional knowledge about the history and everything. So we worked really well together, all of us on this crew. Morgan Lewis, wildlife biologist, been here for 5 years. Can't believe it's been 5 years already. Luke Lawless is our partners and fish and wildlife biologist, private lands guy. He does the Pray for the Pack, which I'll talk about, and working with landowners. We all work with landowners. The landowners each seem to have their favorite person to call, whether it's Luke or myself or Ryan. So we're all out there dealing with landowners, which is a good thing. And then there's Laura Reisman, which is a biotech that has just joined us in the last few months, but she's hit the ground running to help us on all things red wolf. And then Nicole Deathridge, who's been here about a year, which again, I can't believe it's already been that long. She's kind of here on a temp assignment that I keep hoping to make a permanent assignment. So I just, everything I'm talking about, it's those people and myself that are out there doing it. So we're extremely dedicated and passionate about this. So I'm gonna, next slide, sorry. The area I'm gonna talk about is the 5-county area that Emily mentioned. It's the Beaufort, Hyde, Dare, Terrell, and Washington counties. The red wolves are found throughout that area. Sometimes people think they're only found on Alligator River, but that's not the case. They are found spread throughout that entire area. And I'll talk about that a little more in depth as we go through. Next slide. So we're currently operating under the 10J rule on Endangered Species Act that Emily mentioned. It was last revised in 1995, but there's also applicable court decisions that have affected that. So that's what we operate under. The last major court decision, I suppose, is the one in 2021 that they issued a ruling that we need to draft a plan to go back to releasing captive red wolves. Until 2021, we hadn't released any adult red wolves into Eastern North Carolina or anywhere since the mid 90s. So that was something we'd been wanting to get back to, quite honestly. So it was good for the population. And as part of that, we have started developing and implementing and publishing on our website a release plan on an annual basis. We usually have it up by December 1st. It kind of just gives you a general overview of what the plan is for that trapping breeding cycle. So it kind of goes from November through early June of the next year. And we're currently in the middle of developing the one for 2024, 2025. It will look a heck of a lot like the one for 2023, 2024, and I'll go into the specifics of that as well. Emily touched on this, but specific questions asked about the population goal for this population area, and it is based on that recovery plan. It is for at least 180 red wolves to be within this 5-county area. And that's kind of based on what we see as the carrying capacity for this area. Next slide. And I also wanted to mention on that 180 as part of the delisting criteria, and I think she had it on her slide as well, is it would need to stay at that 180 or greater and be stable or increasing for 10 years without extensive human intervention. So without a lot of the things that we currently do, it would need to stay at that population level. So for the recovery plan, for the release plans, the main focus is on pup fostering opportunities whenever possible. We still do the research and experience and all of that. The greatest chance of success for increasing the population and increasing genetic diversity is through pup fostering. And most people on the call probably know what we're talking about when I say pup fostering, but pup fostering is taking pups that are born within the SAFE program and placing them into a wild den. There's a lot of timing. There's a lot of specifics that have to work out for that to be possible to do that. But that is our number one goal, is to foster as much as we can. And quite honestly, this past spring, going into the spring, it looked like we had more potential pup fostering opportunities than we've had in well over a decade. But the nature of the beast, the way things are, for various reasons, like the timing of births and a breeding female that didn't end up having a litter in the wild, and litter size being too big, that kind of thing that we didn't want to add to, and first-time mothers that had litters, we didn't end up being able to take advantage of any pup fostering opportunities. So we hope next year to be able to get back to doing that. The next thing we want to focus on is attempting to pair two wild red wolves. If there's two red wolves out there that are breeding aged, unrelated, both of them are unpaired, and they may be in different areas, and we'll attempt to pair them together, putting them in an acclimation pen in a good territory, one that's open or within one of their territories. If we don't have that option, then what we found to be one of the most successful ways to do it is to pair an animal from the SAFE program with an unpaired wild red wolf within their territory in an open territory. And that allows that wild animal to help that one from the SAFE population transition into the wild. And this was one of the live questions that just came in a minute ago, but if the appropriate conditions exist, both from a SAFE program population standpoint and on the ground and that situation, we will look to release family groups, and have in the past and will again if the right conditions exist. Then that can be trickier than even the other things we're trying to do. So that is one of the options. Next slide, please. Folks kind of sometimes I think we're stagnant in what we're doing, and we're doing the same thing every year, and it doesn't appear on the surface that it's working. But I just want to relay, we are perpetually evaluating everything, the research that's going on, the past management, similar programs, our own experience, what worked, what hasn't worked, because we want to do everything we can to increase our chance of success. So we've changed things quite a bit over the years to do that. And all of that feeds into the development of that annual plan. And even after the development of the annual plan, and we did it today, there's constant conversation about, because everything changes, right? With what's going on the ground, what's happening with the population on the landscape. We're constantly evaluating what we need to change to give us the greatest chance of success for these red wolves out there. Next slide, please. I want to talk about some of the general factors of the red wolves that come from the safe population. And, I work really closely with the safe management, particularly Chris Lasher, who's the population manager, on these criteria. These are like the ideal or what we're looking for. That doesn't mean we're going to tick all these off, right? This is what we look at. First and foremost, we don't want to take an animal out of the SAFE program that's going to negatively impact the genetic makeup or viability of the SAFE population. Would be detrimental to all of us in the long run. So we don't want to do that. We try to select animals that are fed natural whole play food items. We kind of like them to be in the 2 to 4 years old range. They're already breeding age at that point. They haven't been in the enclosures in the safe population for a long time, and those types of things, and they seem to do pretty well. They're adaptable, they're young and fit, and those types of things. We prefer they come from enclosures away from public viewing, preferably larger enclosures. There's less of those out there, of course, but we're getting better at that all the time. We don't want to put red wolves, this is obvious, that exhibit behavior indicative of habituation, because that won't serve them well in the wild and will decrease their chance of being successful out there. And we look at the genetic relatedness of the animals that we're going to release to each other, like to the multiple ones we're going to release, because they could end up, forming pairs with each other, and accordingly with the ones out currently in the wild. Now, that usually isn't a major factor, and because of there hasn't been adult releases in so long until we start again, that one's relatively easy to meet. But going back to the next slide, please. Going back to the changes and perpetually trying to increase things to increase our chance of success. I'll talk about some of the specific things we changed. And the selection factors is one of them. I just mentioned all of those. We've been tweaking those over the years as we see which ones have greater success out there in the landscape. So looking at the safe situation they're in, the type of enclosure, the food habits, those types of things is a big part of it. Speaking with the keepers at the various safe, because it can tick all the boxes, but if we speak to a keeper and they're saying, that's probably not the best one, but such and such would probably be a good fit, then we can kind of go that way too, because those, they are the ones that observe these guys and know their habits and stuff. And looking at reproductive testing, some of them are tested reproductively. We want to know that information before we release them into the wild. We've also changed greatly the type of acclimation pen we use. We used to use soft-sided pens. You can put soft-sided pens, and they're like elk fences. They were electrified on the bottom. You can put them in a lot more places. So in that respect, they're really good pens, and they did a pretty good job of keeping red wolves in, but they didn't do as great a job of keeping bears out. And they weren't as good against the weather, high winds and other things, trees coming down. We had early releases of red wolves out of those that we weren't wanting to happen yet. So we've switched to completely hard-sided pens. Talked about them in the past, and I'll talk about them again. But that has not only let us all sleep a little bit better, because we can at least take that one thing off our box of worries, that the red wolves are still going to be in these pens the next day, whereas the soft-sided ones, that didn't always go that way. Also, the timing of releases. We used to do all releases when we suspected that the female was in heat. So if we had a pair in a pen, even if both were in the pen, we would still release them when the female was in heat, based on this is based on past successes. Because the thinking is that they'll remain together, the male will remain with the female while she's in heat. But we've seen over time and through other programs, the Mexican program being a good example, they saw a greater chance of successful pairing and the animals staying where they wanted them to, and being successful if they let them stay and whelp in the pen and then release the pups when the pups were a little bit older, like 6 weeks old. So we've transitioned to doing that with pairs in pens that have pups. Now there's still, and I'll get into this again, there's still situations where your best bet is releasing them when the female's in heat, and we still do that when necessary. How we do releases is also a big part of it. Back when we started doing releases of animals from the safe, you know, it was kind of the first couple we did a bit more of a media event, or even if we had one media crew with us. And you know, that's not what you want. The whole point of placement of these acclimation pens, besides acclimating to each other for the red wolves, it's acclimating to the area. You want them to feel comfortable staying in that area where you release them. So having a film crew, even if you feel like you're off in the distance looking through spotting scopes, it's exactly detrimental to what you're trying to do. And so now, and we get a lot of requests for people to be at releases, and I think people have a bit of a misnomer about what a release is. And now that release literally is one of us walking in at dusk on the day that we determine the release, opening the door, hammering in a rebar so it doesn't blow closed, and walking away. That's a release. That's all it entails, because we want them to be comfortable, and they can stay in that pen for 2 seconds or they can stay in for 2 weeks. It's up to them at that point once the door is open. So that's what a release is, and that has helped with the releases. Next slide, please. We also changed the type of collars. You know, when we first started doing releases, they were VHF collars, which are hard to track, especially for a newly released animal. So now they all have GPS and VHF for all new releases, and they're orange. All the colors are orange. I'll probably talk about that 50 times between now and then in my presentation, but it allows for better tracking and ID. We've always fed only whole prey food items to the red wolves and acclimation pens, but we were feeding mostly deer, both roadkill and ones that were taken off runways from a safety standpoint. But you know, red wolves that come from the SAFE program, they know how to hunt, but they're not going to be out there taking down a full-grown deer or a deer on day one release. So, and a lot of areas, the focus of even the wild red wolves is on smaller prey items. So we've shifted to incorporating smaller prey items into their diet as well, like nutria and rabbits and rats and mice and those kinds of things. Stuff that they, would help them transition into the wild better. We've also found, and I alluded to this too, that one of the most successful ways that we can create pairs is with a wild female and a captive born male. Now, we'll get to instances where that didn't work so well this year, but it has worked successfully multiple times. And 2361, who was the matriarch of the Pungo family group, is an example of that. And that male, you can literally kind of real time through monitoring and cameras, you saw her kind of teach him over time where to be, where not to be, how visible to be, how visible not to be, where to hunt, those types of things. Also the age of the red wolves that we're trying to create the pairs with, out of necessity, because we didn't have much or too many building blocks when we started trying to regrow the population. We had to focus on creating pairs of animals that were about 1.5 years old. So yearlings. Is that possible to be successful? Yes, it is. 2361, I just mentioned we did that exact thing, but it's not ideal. Some of them are not prepared to be in a pair, prepared to be breeding at that age. It's much better to focus on a little bit older red wolves. Because of some of the building blocks and the individuals we have out there now, we're able to do that a little more. It's focus on the older ones and potentially not use them. We also want ones that have shown that they're ready to disperse. They have on their own shown that they're leaving their area where they were born. So that plays a role in who we pick as well. Next slide, please. And this is acclimation, an example of an acclimation pen I was telling you about. There's several factors. We don't just throw a dart at a map and where to put these. We look at a lot of factors. Is there habitat security there? Is it an open territory? Is there adequate prey there? What's the distance to roads and those types of things? Is it a good place for them to be? You know, because if they have a litter and we release them, they're going to stay at least for the first month or two in close proximity. And we want it to be somewhere that they can survive and thrive. At the acclimation bin. So this time of year, you know, we're very soon here, we're going to start constructing. We have 6 of them out there right now, and one of them is a double one. So in theory, we have 7 that we could use, but they're big. They're hard to move. They're not easy. So we can't just willy-nilly move these around all over the place. But we'll start moving the ones that we feel need to be in different areas than where they currently are. When we have these constructed there, you know, it's a panels of fencing and they get Legoed together basically. They're typically 50 feet by 50 feet. It's not huge. It's not like a dog run, but we have found it to be sort of a compromise of size that is adequate to support them over that time, but also not too cumbersome out there on the landscape. These pens, they have very little human interaction. Like I said, they're remote as we can get them. We only go to the pens once a week. And stay away from them other than that, to give them that solitude and time away from people and those types of things. And again, they're only fed whole prey food items. Next slide, please. We conduct trapping November through March every year on Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge, Pocosin Lakes National Wildlife Refuge, and on private land with landowner permission, both for collaring red wolves and also for coyote sterilization, which I'll talk about. One of the main reasons for capture operations is to capture the red wolves that we're going to try to put in acclimation pens to create these pairs. Red wolf bonding period for breeding starts in October. So from October, even the wild population, and I know in the safe population too, the behavior of the individuals, start to change. Wild pairs that we have out there, they don't necessarily stay right together all summer long. They're within the same territory, but they're not always right together, some more so than others. But as October starts and then starts to get a little more November, a little more December, they're more and more closer together until we get to breeding season, which is in late January, early February, then they're like right together. So we start to do captures in November for animals that we hope to put in acclimation pens. Another key thing with trapping is it's the initial collaring of pups that are born the previous spring. We don't want to catch them when they're too small. We typically like to wait and catch them till January following when they were born. So when they're about 9 months old, they're pretty good size at that point. They're usually in the upper 40 pounds, lower 50 pounds, and plenty able to handle being trapped and collared at that point. In this past winter that we did collar all of the remaining 5 pups on Alligator River from that were born in spring 2023, and the 2 yearling female pups that were born at Pocosin Lakes last year. Next slide, please. So all of the releases and all captured red wolves will continue to be collared with the orange collars. The orange collar is important. It signifies, and I'll get to that a little bit later too, but we will continue to do that. And all of them, the newer ones, will have GPS VHF collars. We still have a few VHF collars out there right now, but we'll be switching those to GPS collars when we're able to. There might be a few instances where an animal is too small to have a GPS collar, and we may use a VHF collar. It'd still be orange though. But generally, all releases from the SAFE program, new releases will have GPS collars, and we use them whenever we can at this point. The battery life is such that we can use them and not have to replace them. I will say too, with the collaring, we don't exceed 4% body weight based on research. So if an animal is too small, coyote, red wolf, or whatever, if we can't somehow put a collar on it that meets that criteria, then we won't collar. But because the collars are getting lighter and lighter and lighter, we haven't run into that instance. We actually are able and prefer to stay down a collar that doesn't exceed 3% of their body weight, just to give them that extra thing. You want to put the smallest collar on that will do the job, but research after research shows that it's not detrimental to their survival well-being if you do that. Pups are too small to be collared, like I mentioned, and that's when they're most vulnerable because their size overlaps with coyotes. So it's not as easy to identify them as a red wolf. We in the safe population have tried and looked into different ways of marking pups, but as of date, marking them as a red wolf, but to date there is no effective way to do that. We're also looking into ways with the increasing popularity of using infrared scopes and thermal imaging for folks when they're recreating out there in the woods. We're looking for ways to mark these collars in a way that will pop on infrared and thermal imaging. So it, particularly the red wolves, so that it really, if you look at them and say, instantly what you're looking at in the dark or whatever. So we're looking at ways to do that. We haven't successfully found that yet, but we're going to continue that. I don't know if this is the right slide to talk about it, but one of the questions asked about why we're continuing to release red wolves in an area with legal coyote hunting. I want to say first that coyote hunting is not legal and not allowed on the wildlife refuges within the Eastern North Carolina red wolf population area, and it's not allowed on the North Carolina Wildlife Resource Commission game lands within Eastern North Carolina. So there are areas, large areas that are protected from legal coyote hunting. And we all, as the collar illustrates, we always are looking for ways to make it easier for the public to identify the difference between a coyote and a red wolf. Also, at this point, because of there's no longer red wolves throughout the historic range. Back when they were throughout the entire Southeast, they were keeping coyotes from moving into this area. But without that red wolf presence, coyotes have moved in from the plain states and are found throughout the entire historic range of red wolves. So in pretty much everywhere, except for the type of instances, and like I just said, on some wildlife refuges or some national parks and those types of things, coyote hunting is legal in just about everywhere in most areas. So it would be a pretty daunting task to try to you wouldn't be able to do it, I guess, to have viable populations of red wolves if you only released in areas that did not allow some level of coyote hunting. Next slide, please. So this past winter, we had 5 active acclimation pens with red wolves in them. And again, the whole purpose was to try to create breeding pairs. We had 2 acclimation pens that were that instance of a safe-born male and a wild female. We had 1 pen that was 2 wild red wolves that were together in the pen. 1 pen that was a lone wild female, which obviously isn't ideal. And I'll talk about that in a minute. And then we had 1 that was a safe-born male that was placed in a wild female's territory. And I'll go into that as well. Next slide, please. So 1 pairing of a safe male and a wild female had a litter of 5 pups. That's kind of well known at this point, and I'll talk about the fate of those pups in a minute. For the female that was alone, 2538, she was captured late in breeding season. We had been attempting to capture a male to put in that pen with her, a wild male, and we're not able to catch him, and he became one of the vehicle strike mortalities on Highway 64 before we were able to capture him and put him in that pen. So she ended up staying alone in that pen. We kept her in that pen because she was caught later in the breeding season. If she had in fact been pregnant with a hybrid litter, then it would have been an opportunity for us to foster some red wolf pups. That's one of those opportunities I mentioned earlier that we felt like we had lots of that didn't end up panning out. So she was released, so she's back out on the landscape, and that pen was within her territory, and she still remains within her territory. So we will attempt in some form or fashion again this winter to hopefully try to pair her with somebody, whether it's an acclimation pen or a male within her territory. None of the other pairs that I mentioned in the acclimation pens, other than the safe male and wild female, how the pups ended up staying together. And one of the safe males that was in a pen with a wild female, we did not end up releasing him. So, and that's another thing that we've kind of changed on, because previously, even if the pair didn't have pups, we released both of them in hopes that they would stay together, and that time in the pen had bonded them, those types of things. But too often they would split away from each other pretty readily, and the wild red wolf would, go about what they were doing before and leave the cat, the one from the safe population, kind of to fend for themselves. So even though this litter, these two in this pen, from from our observation of them from remote sensing cameras, they appeared to be a good pair. They appeared to like each other. They got along, those types of things. But because they didn't have a litter, and because of that past experience, we chose not to release the male. And this, we also know this wild female, she moves around a lot. There's no home range for her. She's all over the place. Her home range size is the Eastern North Carolina red wolf population area. She moves all over the place, and based on our experience, there's no way that a captive born male would be able to follow her and keep up with her fresh out of being released. So we kept him in the acclimation pen. We will attempt this winter again to pair him with a wild red wolf, either her if she's captured or a different wild female. Next slide, please. So when we do these releases, we track and monitor these newly released red wolves every single day. Even if they have GPS collars, it's supposed to give us, we have it set. They have different schedules that we can put these GPS collars on. It's set to give us a point every morning at 8 a.m. We don't always get that point at 8 a.m. Sometimes that 8 a.m. point comes in at 8 p.m., which is not really helpful from a management standpoint. But if that point doesn't come in at 8 a.m., then we're out there tracking, and we're probably going to be out there anyway to get a point for where they are. So we know where they are every day for at least the first 30 days or so for all the new releases. And within that time frame, and as long as we feel like it's needed based on their behavior and what they're doing, we place supplemental food, whole prey items, again, not so they know it's us and not, directly at them, but in areas they're going to find it wherever it's feasible to help them do that transition into the wild. Like I said, the red wolves in the SAFE program, they know how to hunt. In fact, any small mammal or bird that goes into an enclosure knows that they know how to hunt, but it hasn't quite triggered yet in some of them that they need to hunt to survive. So that we help them with that transition wherever we can. For all the wild red wolves, we track them multiple times a week, both through GPS and through ground telemetry, like Ryan's doing in the photo, and through aerial telemetry with flights whenever we're able to. We're not able to do routine flights right now, just because of the plane and pilot situation, and it's difficult in this part of the country to have those readily available. And we also have remote cameras all over the place on refuges and on private land with landowner permission. Over 50 of them. I don't know if that number may even be higher at this point, but it seems like we're always adding some, and very rarely do we take any down. Next slide, please. So we also, this is a change, and I talked about it. It's not so much a change now, I guess, because we've been doing it for 3 or 4 years, is whenever through our monitoring, we know red wolves are spending time on a particular parcel of private land, we call that landowner to let them know that red wolf is there, to make them aware of the presence of that red wolf, both so they know about the orange collar and that they're there, so they're not surprised by it, or, if they see one, and also so we can address their concerns up front. It's much better that way than them having no idea that they're on their land and, calling later on to let us know it's there, or if they're having some sort of issue. And we encourage those folks and anybody to call and contact us anytime for questions and concerns. We are constantly responding to all sorts of methods people get a hold of us. Sometimes not the best hours of the day, but it is what it is. And we will address all time sensitive issues, 24/7 whenever possible. And we'll participate in meetings and give presentations when we're invited. If we just had a town meeting in Mans Harbor as part of that CCT, they had met with Francine, and they felt like they wanted a conversation directly with not only myself, but WRC and the refuge folks. So they invited us to a town meeting, and we went to that town meeting and had good discussions with them. And so that is an option, and we want to be able to do that for the benefit of the species and the program. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to go into some of the results of the release stuff from last year. So we placed, and most of you guys, we placed the wild female 2413 and a safe born male 2444 in an acclimation pen on Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge. And they had 5 pups in the pen. And for what we're doing now, we released them when the pups were a little bit shy of 6 weeks old when they were released. The male from that group that came from the SAFE program, seemed to be doing really well transitioning to the wild. They moved the pups initially together, the male and the female, about, if I remember the math correctly, about 1.5 miles from the pen, which is not unexpected. And they had them in a pretty good spot, actually, pretty good habitat, not to prey, pretty decent habitat security to some degree. And the male was doing a pretty good job of staying near the pups and seemed to be caring for the pups. And we were supplemental feeding as appropriate. The female, after they moved out of the acclimation pen, from the beginning, she was not staying with the pups very often or even returning. She would go away for 2 to 3 days at a time. And this is while they were still in the nursing phase. So she was having trouble, transitioning to being a first-time mother, which is not entirely uncommon. It's not outside of the norm that some first-time mothers don't provide optimal care for pups. So that was kind of the mode they were in already. And we were helping to try to transition him into the wild and care for those pups. But he was unfortunately hit by a vehicle and killed a few weeks after that. And she never returned to the pups. They were about 6 weeks old at the time, so not able to survive on their own. Now, do we know absolute certainty the fate of the pups? We do not. We don't have any. We did not find carcasses. We did do a lot of monitoring in that area, extensive monitoring, remote sensing cameras, walking in, telemetry on the adults and those types of things. Could there have been something that wasn't the abandonment, perhaps, some sort of disease or something like that, or predation? We don't know. But, and I know there's a lot of questions about this, and there's a lot of, behind, people questioning how we took care of it, what we did, how we did it, those types of things. It is not something we took lightly. It was painstaking for us to go through this and deal with it. And the goal of the recovery is the recovery of them in the wild, right? The safe population, they're growing the safe population. Our goal is to grow the wild population. And so there's a limit to the level of human intervention that we can do. And what we did is and was in line with keeping those limits in mind. So, these are wild, free-ranging animals. People need to remember that. Once we release it from the pen, that safe-born animal is no longer a safe-born animal. It's a wild animal, right? And although we have a really good idea on their movements and what they're doing and their locations, we don't know where every red wolf is at every point in time, especially pups that are small and uncollared. And at that age, they're pretty mobile, right? So we can't, and we don't know what down to the nth degree what's happening. We're doing our best without putting a camera right where we are, because we don't want to intervene. We can't get in the middle because that will just make things worse. We can't put food right where we think the pups are, because all that'll do is draw bears in, right? These are all day-to-day tough decisions on how to deal with a situation like this. And we also, with 2413, we have no idea what 2413 is thinking, what her actions are, how she's going to behave, when she would return, if she was going to return. In the best possible scenario, even after that male's mortality, was her returning to those pups and being a successful mother. That's what we were hoping for. That's what we were, trying to help with as much as we could. That didn't happen, but you don't know in the time as you're dealing with that whether that's going to happen or not. And you're still planning for the best case scenario. I mean, you're planning for the worst, but you're hoping for the best. On the flip side of that, these pups were 6 weeks old. That is beyond when you can foster them successfully. One of the reasons pup fostering occurs within the first 2 weeks is because that's when the maternal instinct of the mother, of the recipient mother getting the new pups, is the strongest. And when you do it within that timing, you don't have pups rejected. Doing it at 6 weeks, it's not anywhere near as likely to be successful, and maybe not successful at all. So we couldn't really foster, even if we were, that's a big if, we were able to capture them, we would not have been able to foster them. So, okay, you don't foster them. then, but you put them in captivity so you don't lose these pups. That's not in line with the Fish and Wildlife Service and SAFE program guidelines for recovery species. They would have to be hand raised. This is a recovery species. They're not treated like other animals in zoos and such are, because those animals aren't recoverable, releasable species. So if these animals were put in the safe, they would take up pen space and they would have to be hand fed. They wouldn't be releasable because they would be too habituated to people, and they wouldn't be good candidates for breeding in the SAFE program either, because they could pass along those behaviors and traits of habituation to their pups, which need to be considered as recovery species and potentially releasable in the wild. So, you know, I'm not, this is not to defend our actions or anything like that, but this is to try to get a little more fine-tuned understanding of how that situation evolved and what we were doing behind the scenes about it. The monitoring of that pair was extensive. Supplemental feeding was done extensively to the degree that we could. We closed that entire area to farming for the year, not even for that time, because by the time we lifted the restrictions, it was too late. So we worked with refuges. We shifted the entire plan of the cooperative farming to have no farming in that field where those pups were. And in addition to that, someone posted about seeing the wild female mother in that area on social media. And almost within 2 hours of that, we had people walking on the roads in that area. So we had to shut down that area. Working with refuges, we had to close that area to the public so that they didn't get an increased pressure. So again, I just wanted to relay a lot of questions about that litter, a lot of them, and you know, I wanted to address those as openly and honestly as I possibly can. Next slide, please. And if you could play the video on this one, hopefully. Another result of the plan was the you know, most of you know, last fall, the breeding male of the Milltail pack 2323 was a vehicle strike mortality on Highway 64. And at one point we were thinking we would wait a year to try to find a new mate for 2225, but she really quickly, within the next couple of weeks, because that's what they're doing, that's what they're driven to do, she had started hanging out with a coyote again, potentially as with a coyote mate. So we made the decision that we need to strike fast to try to get her a red wolf mate. And we quickly constructed an acclimation pen within her territory, and we placed the safe-born male 2191. So that's them. This is about a week after he was released. So we released him when she was in heat so that he would be more likely to find, because we didn't have her in the acclimation pen. She's extremely savvy on the trapping. We'll probably never catch her again until she loses some of her senses and gets older and doesn't, her smell and sight and hearing and all that isn't quite as good. We probably won't catch her. So she was not in the pen with him. So we released him when she was in heat. And we know pretty closely when she's in the heat because she's had litters the past 2 years, 63 days of the gestation period. So we can backtrack from when we know they were born to those 63 days. I'm looking at the time and I'm no way I'm going to be done by 8. I'm just throwing that out there to Megan. But this is all valuable information, and I'm incorporating a lot of your questions specifically on that, so that's going to make it a little bit longer. So that's the deal on that pair. Next slide, please. We did confirm in April that they did have a litter of 8 pups, 4 females, 4 males. As with most, we find dens based on the telemetry of the female. And we go in and we cheek swab the pups for genetic analysis. We do a general exam, remove any ticks and things they might have. And then we microchip them just like you would your pet. And then we get out of there. We don't want to be in there fast. We never go back in. The best thing for those pups after we do the initial analysis, so we can track them later on, and if something happens to them, we can know, microchip who they are, that type of thing. It's for us to stay out of there. So that's what we did with that litter as well. Next slide, please. So for that, pair. It was, excuse me, for that litter, it was the third consecutive litter for 22-25. She's the matriarch of the Milltail family. But it was her first litter with 2191 since he was a safe release. That release went better than we could have imagined. Like I said, they almost immediately paired up and stayed together after release. They stayed in the area of the den for the first several weeks, which is pretty typical. Then the entire family group moved to an area of the farm fields. The pups were visually observed there, and our monitoring indicator there. The adults were going back there, and some adult or recolored animal was always there. We buffered that area from all management activities, so no harm would come to them. They stayed there for about 3 weeks, which is normal, and then they moved to yet a different area, which again that's normal behavior. As the pups grew, you've got them in a place, and then you move them all somewhere else. They moved to another area that was a little bit more difficult to monitor, but we were still able to monitor it fairly well. We buffered that from farming activity again. And the adults were going there day after day. There was typically an adult in that area. But then that over time, that sort of dissipated. And that's what we see naturally. But typically, when that happens, we start seeing pups on remote sensing cameras, or visually, if we have a visual adult, we start seeing a pup with him. And we had a few early on sightings of a single pup, it seemed like, on a remote sensing camera. But since late June, we have not had any confirmed sighting of those pups. Now, again, with that other litter, not saying definitively there's no pups out there, but by now, we typically are seeing all over the place within the territory with the adults on multiple cameras. And we're not seeing that. So we expect or speculate that they're no longer out there. I assure you, we would all be extremely ecstatic if we're wrong. I would love to be wrong, and if that's the case. I don't want to speculate on too much what could have happened to them. Pups are extremely elusive to keep track of and find. It could have been anything. It could have been an intraspecific stripe. It could have been a red wolf stripe. It was a new male. He was a first-time male. I don't know. 2413 was over in that area after she was not with her pups. I don't know. Could have been disease, parvo, distemper. I don't know. Predation by bears. Again, the list is immense, and I can tell you that it's been running through all of our minds for the last 3 months of what happened and what could have gone wrong out there. All right, next slide, please. After all of that, the releases, the mortalities, all that, the current known population is 16 collared red wolves out there in the landscape. And I know that doesn't sound like a lot. It's not a lot. It's perilously low. We all wish it was higher, but it is creeping up. And that is, and this was a surprise even to me, and I think to the crew as well, that actually is a 23% in the population since last year. So it doesn't necessarily feel like it, but these efforts are paying off. Are there mortalities? Yes. Are there activities that are not successful? Yes. But what we're doing is a difficult task to release a large predator on a landscape out there. And it's fraught with downsides. Of those 16 red wolves, 11 of them have GPS collars. We'll be attempting to change those 5 that don't have GPS collars this winter, but we'll see how successful we are at that. The estimated total wild population is 17 to 19. And the estimated total wild population, it's to account for if there's one out, if we're seeing an animal on camera that we think is a red wolf, but it's not collared, or there's a sightings of someone that, of one that we suspect is, or there's ones whose collars had died, or pups that we suspect are still out there. And it's just, it's kind of to convey that we can't say for certainty that there's only 16 red wolves out there. That's not possible. It's a wild population. But right now, we don't know of any that fit in all those categories I just said. A collar that isn't working, one that we've seen on camera that we feel strongly is a red wolf, that kind of thing. So we suspect that number of total is closer to that lower end of that 17 to 19 and maybe the 16, but I don't want to, that's not certainty. So somebody asked if we look at all of this, the management actions and everything we're doing at the individual level or the population level. And I guess the full answer is both. You have to do both, but even when we're looking at it from an individual, it's about the population. This is not about saving an individual. This is about saving the individual because of what they represent for the population, right? Every individual is important, especially at a population of 16. One individual is 6% of the population. So from that aspect, and from looking at it from a genetic match, when we're talking about creating pairs or that kind of thing, we have to look at it at the individual level. And we have to look at it at the individual level because we have to know the situation that individual came from and the behavior that they've exuded, both in the safe population and in the wild. So we know how to use them, where to put them to give them the greatest chance of success, right? We want that for them, but as an individual, but because of what they represent for the population. Every action we take is intended to increase the population and sustain the growth and viability of the population. Some of the actions we take, if you're really looking at it from an individual, is not really the best for that individual. And an example is what I talked about earlier. Ideally, we would like a wolf that's red wolf that's 2 years old or older and showing signs of natural dispersal before we take them and put them in acclimation pens. But we don't always have that luxury. With a population this low, we have to push the envelope sometimes. So we use younger red wolves that are 1.5 years instead, and ones that haven't shown that they're dispersing. 2361, again, who is now the matriarch of the Pungo family, is a perfect example of that. She was 1.5 years. She hadn't shown any signs of dispersing, but in order for us, before we can get back to pup fostering, you got to have breeding pairs. So we got to, try to create these breeding pairs. So we put her in an acclimation pen, and in that instance, it was successful. Was that the best for that individual? That can be debated. Was that the best for the population? Absolutely it was. Next slide, please. I get told I don't smile enough on these presentations, and I don't think I've smiled once, but I'm just trying to convey all of this information as much in detail and give this information as I can. So if I don't smile, you'll have to forgive me. Okay, so a lot of the information in this slide comes directly from information that was asked in the questions. There's currently 2 red wolf breeding pairs family groups out on the landscape. And they're the Milltail pair on Alligator River and the Pungo pair over on Costa National Wildlife Refuge, Coast Lakes National Wildlife Refuge, and adjacent. They use a lot of private land. Now I say they're breeding pairs, but the one on Pungo, we also feel like she had pups early, and something happened, and so we're not sure what it, but she didn't have any. She did not exhibit denning behavior very long, so she either didn't whelp or something happened to those pups early on as well. 17 of the red wolves are on Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge. And one of the questions specifically asked how many red wolves are on Alligator River. So I say that there's 7 on Alligator River, but a lot of times when people ask me how many red wolves are on Alligator River, what they're really thinking is that there's only red wolves on Alligator River. So I want to dispel that. Again, I mentioned it earlier. So 17 to 16, so more than half of them aren't even on Alligator River. And the other 9, a lot of them are not on refuges at all. The 4 family group of the Pungo family group are on refuges sometime. The other ones are not using any refuge habitat currently. They're on private land. And we need that. We cannot have a viable population of red wolves on refuges alone. It's not enough habitat. It cannot support a viable population. So we need them on that private land, which goes back to what Emily was talking about, why it's so vital that we have that communication and that trust and work with these landowners and be honest with them and upfront about what we're doing and what we want to do. And we hear what they need from us to make this successful. There's currently, of the 16, there's 7 unpaired wild red wolves out there. 6 of them are female, 1 is male. We do not have any currently considered adult wild males out there. And I'll get to that in a little bit. And, you know, come survival till next spring, that one male, 2411, he'll be an adult. He'll be 3 years old. He'll be, you know, classified as an adult, I guess. As far as what we're going to do this winter, as far as creating how many pairs are we going to create? How many acclimation pens? There's so many factors, and we discussed this today. Whatever we say now is probably going to change by November when we start actually doing capture operations to put them in pens. And it's based on our access to where the red wolves are. It's based on how many unpaired red wolves we have, changes in the population numbers, movements of them between now and then, things that happen over the course of the winter. But our goal is to have a minimum of 3 acclimation pens active and potentially up to 5, depending on the conditions. So we'll see how that all pans out. And I also wanted to just point out that there have been no red wolf coyote hybrid litters in the last 2 years. So we have every known red wolf collared, and we know, you know, the situations with those 16 red wolves, and there were the last 2 years there have been no hybrid litters. Is that to say that there's no hybrids out there? Absolutely not. There's almost certainly hybrids out there from previous, you know, older ones from previous events of hybridization, but there hasn't been in the last couple of years. Next slide, please. I was like, man, that didn't look like the next slide. Okay. This is the age class for the red wolf population currently. I put the one on there from 2021 so you can see how different it looks now. That's when we were down to 7 individuals. And when we had those 7 individuals, that chart on the left goes to age 14. So it shows you how old those red wolves were. We had several that were past breeding age. We had no reproduction going, and those were aging out. And there were no pairs. There were no breeding pairs. Now you can see it's 16, still low. Nobody thinks 16 is enough. Well, there's probably somebody that thinks 16 is enough, but nobody that's looking forward to red wolf recovery thinks 16 is enough. But we have a lot more building blocks. There's a lot more for potential for growth. We have a lot more opportunities that there may be pairs that create themselves, and that kind of thing. So we're in a much better place. 16 now is compared even just not to numbers, but the type of who those 16 are. And again, I want to point out to folks that say you need to quit releasing, you know, the same things happen again. I want to point to that 0.38% increase, but I also want to point out that 31% of the red wolves that are out there are direct releases from safe. And that doesn't count the ones that are out there that are a result of breeding from ones that came from safe. That is just the animal themselves were released from safe, either as a yearling in one case, adult males in the 2 that you see on there, and we fostered the 3-year-old females that you see on there were fostered from SAFE program. And one of those is, again, 2361 that I brought up a billion times, is the matriarch on the Pungo family group. So it all ties in together, it all feeds together. These releases are being successful. Is it to the rate and degree we want? No. We will always be trying to increase that success, but it is working. It just is going to take time. And I also want to point out that, you know, of those direct releases, 2 of them, they're both family group breeding males are from captive releases, as is the one female of one of those breeding groups. Next slide, please. This is the general distribution map across the 5 counties to show you generally where these red wolves are. And I say dispersing on the ones that were not, you know, they're not necessarily set in that territory. They're still moving a lot. And, you know, I think it's self-explanatory. The Fs are females, the Ms are males, and the YFs or YMs are yearlings. So I just want to give a kind of a breakdown of of that. And and the 2 dispersing red wolves you see on the far western side of this map, there's a male and a female. Those are both wild red wolves. They're both unrelated. They're unrelated to each other, and they keep getting closer to each other and then kind of splitting, but they know each other exist. We know that from monitoring now. And one of those is the disperser from Alligator River. So one of them dispersed quite a bit. So our hope, don't know if it'll happen. Our hope is that those 2 will win. You know, we haven't got to the bonding period yet. So even if they know each other exists, even if they wanted to pair, they wouldn't have done it yet. So our hope is as the bonding period progresses, those two will continue to remain close to each other and eventually pair up, but we will monitor that heavy. I also want to point out with this map, because I've shown ones like this and ones with even more detail greatly, but I show this map in order to be honest with the public and forthcoming and disclose where red wolves are at, their current locations as we know it based on our monitoring. Please don't take this map as a challenge to go find these individuals, because in most cases, that's not the best case scenario for you, for the red wolves. This is, it's not a check mark to say, oh, found them, need to go find the other one. And I also will say, as we are, please be very aware of private land and very respectful of private land out there on the landscape, because that will be detrimental to the Red Wolf Recovery Program and red wolves if we have folks on private land without permission looking for red wolves. All right, next slide, please. All right. Similar disclaimer to this, what I'm showing you now. This is something that we've been working on, and when I say we, 95% Morgan, have been developing to help the public and to disclose, to kind of hopefully get rid of some of the misinformation that's out there regarding the wild population. Who's with who, or who's survived, and what's going on, what numbers, who's, and the letters on their collars, that kind of thing. So we've been working on this for months to try to get it right, to try to get it look right, to read right, to be a good documentation of what's going on out there. And based on what we're hearing that people want and the questions we get and those kinds of things. So I'm just showing this to you as a precursor to when this thing comes out. And I don't know when we're gonna release it, and I don't know how often we're gonna release it. It will be a periodic release. We certainly don't have the ability and time to update it every time something changes. But this is something that will be coming out there that I hope kind of dispels some of the misinformation and is a good resource. And again, my disclaimer on this slide is that to ensure you get accurate information, please refer to this and the recovery program website. The top of the recovery program website has the updated population. As soon as it's information that can be publicly available, that number changes on our website. So for accuracy, for all population information, I would urge you to please use the Red Wolf Recovery Program as the resource. Next slide, please. Oh boy, I got a long way to go. I'm gonna have to speed up. Mortalities. There have been 4 mortalities in 2024. 2 of those were vehicle strike mortalities on Highway 64 and the same general stretch, 2410, 2444. One wild red wolf was humanely euthanized after she was acting really bizarre and not her normal self. She's a very, very elusive red wolf, but she was seen right. We saw her along the roadside several days in a row, and she ended up having a brain tumor that was not treatable. So she was euthanized. And then one mortality of a yearling male is unknown cause and under investigation. A couple of questions have been brought up about steps we're taking to monitor the roadside baiting of red wolves intentionally, or the feeding and baiting of red wolves in general. I just want to say we haven't seen evidence of that, of what we would consider intentional roadside baiting, and we don't have any information or knowledge that baiting is currently occurring. But we'll take the appropriate actions if that occurs and involve law enforcement. We are, however, continuing to look at ways to potentially increase monitoring along Highway 64 and in the Red Wolf Recovery Program in general to kind of detect or deter those types of activities. Next slide, please. I want to talk about vehicle strike mortalities. I know a lot of people don't like seeing pictures like this. I don't like seeing pictures like this, but it's the reality, and it's a reality we face way, way too often. Vehicle strikes are the second leading cause of mortality since reintroduction. So since 1987, gunshot mortality is still the leading cause of mortality. However, over the last 10 years, vehicle strike mortalities is the leading cause of mortality. Highway 64 through Alligator River, that 12-mile stretch, is where the most vehicle strike mortalities have occurred. Now, part of that is because of that's closest to where there's been red wolves the longest, because where the original ones were released in 1987, we've had packs there that sustained and reproduced over the years there more than in other areas. So there's just been more time, but it is problematic. And it's not just about red wolves that were released close either, because red wolves that have been released over 15 miles away have still been vehicle strike mortalities on Highway 64. It's just a bad spot for multiple reasons. 16 different red wolves have been on or north of the highway, and I say on or north. Most of them that have been on have been north of the highway. So 16 different ones just in the last 5 years, and 7 of those were vehicle strike mortalities, and 4 of them we actually captured north of the highway, and either put them in acclimation pens or they were returned to captivity. So it's definitely a continuing problem. Next slide, please. What are we doing about it? I think a lot of people feel we're doing nothing about it, but that's not accurate. Would we like to find more effective ways? Yes, we definitely would. But there are lots of things being done about it. We have the mobile highway signs that anybody in the area have seen that we put in areas where red wolves use roads. We move those around, believe it or not. Anybody that's driven through Highway 64 to the refuge the last 3 years knows those signs have never moved. That's because there's been red wolf use in close proximity to the road the entire 3 years. When we put those out, we did not expect to leave them there this long, but that's the reality of the situation. We also have started putting the orange reflective material on all the radio collars a couple of years ago to increase visibility. It has helped. Is it a cure? Definitely not. Red wolves with reflective material still get hit. We've commissioned a road ecology study through a contractor, Western Transportation Institute, and that report was given to us in last September, and that gives us a lot of information on crossings and ways to deal with it and those types and the mortalities. And that information, I'll talk about that again on the next slide. And we're also currently in the middle of collaborating on multiple research projects. Multiple. I don't even know honestly the count off the top of my head, but 4 or 5 having to do with the spatial movement of red wolves in relation to roads or residential areas, on the different types of deterrent methods to try to keep them from wanting to go to the road, to detection methods of when they're on the road and those types of things. We're looking at all those different things and different technologies, and we'll try anything that seems to have merit, I guess, and viable. We've also created, and this is a picture of the front side of it, and distributed this outreach materials that are specific to driving in red wolf country to raise the alarm. Those are placed at rest areas throughout the eastern North Carolina area, not just within the 5 counties. And they're also distributed through some of the vacation rental companies. When you, if you book a vacation rental, since you're going to be driving here, a great deal of people, they're distributed through that way as well. And I'm going to be so over. People ask about the wildlife crossing. So this is it is a lot of people ask why we're not in a rush to put wildlife crossings. Wildlife crossings are not something you can rush. It's just, they just aren't. But we are working towards that. We're trying to work towards that. We are currently collaborating with NCDOT and Wildlife Resource Commission to submit a grant proposal. It was submitted 3 weeks ago for $25 million to do wildlife crossings in one of the worst areas. And as part of that, there's a required 20% match in funding. So the funding would be over $31 million total for this project. And that's being covered both by DOT, but also through the efforts and private donations secured by Center for Biological Diversity and Wildlands Network. So that's a big piece of this, the funding. This stuff is not cheap. Next slide. All right, so this phase 1, this is just phase. We'd like to do that whole 12-mile stretch on there. That would cost, way more than we put in for 25 million because that's the highest amount you're allowed to put in on this application for this wildlife crossing grant through federal highways. I think I even skipped talking about that, but that's who we did the grant application with. So phase 1 focuses on the placement of underpasses in the area that has the most vehicle strike mortalities and highway crossings. And on that map, it's the section that's in the red box. It's about a 2.5-mile stretch. So that would be the focus. And it would include multiple underpasses. It's not just one, it's multiple and at least 2, if not 3, that are the size that would allow for red wolf passage. And then, but then all sorts of different sizes to allow for all the species that would be expected to cross there and or vehicle strike mortality. So black bear, white-tailed deer, those types of things. And but even if we get the award granted, and we don't know how long it'll take, could be 6 months longer to get this award. Completion of this project from start to finish is we're probably still looking at 4 to 5 years to complete, which is why we need to continue to focus on ways to reduce vehicle strike mortalities. Next slide, please. Another thing that people ask a lot about is coyote management. And quite honestly, as part of the settlement agreement and doing of lawsuits and doing this, coyote management is one of the big pieces that we said we would talk about in Eastern North Carolina. We have a strategy called the Adaptive Management Strategy. And basically it was developed in the late 90s by a group of scientists to try to reduce inbreeding between coyotes and red wolves. It entails the removal of some coyotes and the sterilizing of other coyotes. So sterilized coyotes, if they're left hormonally intact, they will defend their territory in areas that don't have red wolves. So they'll keep other coyotes out. And then if and when a red wolf moves in that area, they will displace the coyote. We've never seen an instance of coyotes displacing red wolves, but there's lots of instances of red wolves displacing coyotes. So that's why it's sometimes referred to as the placeholder theory. I'm gonna have to go a little faster some of this. Next slide. Coyote sterilization is done at no cost to landowners. It's actually covered by the Red Wolf Coalition, which I'll talk about. All sterilized coyotes are collared with white collars at this point, and they're released where they're captured. We used to collar coyotes with black collars, and there's still 14 of them out there that have black collars. But from here on, and for the last couple of years, they're white collars. So over time, as the coyotes that are collared age out or mortalities, they will all have white collars. It helps reduce hybridization, and it also helps reduce the coyote population locally. It actually benefits a lot of the land management goals for a lot of the landowners because they're wanting to have more turkey or quail, and coyotes focus more on some of the predators of those species, whereas red wolves don't eat a whole lot of bird species. So it can benefit landowners in their goals. It also benefits red wolf recovery. And it's been shown to be effective based on research that was done here in the Albemarle Peninsula back 10, 15 years ago. Next slide, please. All right. So as part of the population viability analysis that was done and published last year, it was a piece of the Red Wolf Recovery Plan. It recommends that we sterilize 10% of the coyote population every year and remove or euthanize 5%. Our goal is to increase the level of coyote capture and sterilization. The Red Wolf Recovery Program, the ones that of us that are part of the trapping program, part of that, with the time that we have, try to trap and sterilize and re-release as many coyotes as we can, but that number needs to increase so we can try to get to that 10% goal recommended in the PVA. Now, based on how we trapped this year, we were able to trap 10% within local areas, but certainly not 10% of the coyote population 5 county wide. The focus of where we do coyote trapping and sterilization, people ask that a lot. Again, it's not just throwing darts at a map, it's systematic. We trap around where we're going to have acclimation pens because that's where we're trying to establish red wolves. So we want them to not hybridization not occur, but we don't want additional coyotes there. We want to, lessen that so that they're able to push them out and take over that territory. We are trapping in areas adjacent to existing red wolf presence to allow for that same, to make expansion more likely and hybridization less likely. And also we focus on prey for the pack parcels with past or present red wolf use as part of that. And that's kind of a prioritization of how we do it. But honestly, if time allows, any private landowner, whether they're prey for the pack or not, that will allow us to trap and sterilize and release on their lands, we'll do it if we have the time. Next slide, please. This last trapping season, we captured and released 24 coyotes. I'm sorry, we captured 24 coyotes during and that was on refuges and on 4 different parcels of private land. 20 of those coyotes were sterilized, collared, and released, and 4 were euthanized. Euthanization is based on location and age and those types of things. We're trying to make sure we keep the age of the coyote, trying to make sure we keep the breeding pairs out on the landscape. And then 2 additional coyotes were caught by private trappers, sterilized, collared, and released by Fish and Wildlife Service where they were captured with landowner approval. And 4 different sterilized coyotes from past years, or even this year, I guess, were mortalities throughout 2024. So all that together, there's currently 36 sterilized coyotes out there with active radio collars. So you can see we added 20 last year, so in theory, we'll be hoping to add that amount or more in different areas as we go along. Like I said, the sterilization is paid for by the Red Wolf Coalition, and it's performed by Dr. Ford, who's pictured there on the right, and Ashley Schwain, who's the vet tech at the Chowan Animal Hospital. So they do all of our they currently do all of our sterilizations. We are looking into ways to increase our ability to do more sterilizations as the need and captured increases. Next slide, please. I want to briefly talk about St. Vincent National Wildlife Refuge. It is a massive piece of the Red Wolf Recovery Program. It is an island propagation site off the Gulf Coast of Florida. The plan there is that we maintain a breeding pair on the island in the wild. They reproduce in the wild. When those pups get dispersal age, 1.5 years old or so, we trap those young and move them up here to, right now, we move them up here to the Eastern North Carolina Red Wolf population area. Once we establish more populations, then they can help we can translocate to other population areas as well. Unfortunately, currently there is a pair of red wolves on there, and they're a good pair in the sense that they work well together, they stay together. It's a safe-born male, but he's been out there for 2.5 years, so he's definitely a wild red wolf. But they haven't had any litters. So I guess this is an example of we're looking at the population rather than the individual, because they've had 2.5 breeding seasons basically, and they weren't successful. So there's clearly something not successful with them with breeding. We have seen them on camera with attempted breeding. So with no indication of a litter this year, we're going to have to try to switch out the male. And hopefully we'll be successful at that. But the plan will be to take a new male from the safe population that's already been identified to the island, and then trap the existing male and remove him from the island, and try to create a new pair with the breeding female there. Hopefully that's successful. And Ryan sent us a text not too long before the presentation that there's actually a hurricane that's supposed to hit, or looks like it's going to go right over St. Vincent in the next couple of days. So hopefully they weather that well. Next slide, please. Talk recently about the Red Wolf Center. I'd actually taken this slide out just because I talk about it all the time, but then questions came up about it again. So I wanted to talk about the Red Wolf Center. It is located just outside of Columbia, North Carolina on Highway 94. It used to be a really ugly brown building. For 1.5 years now, we've had this awesome mural, and that mural and the events surrounding that mural has increased the visitation to that and the visibility of that facility. And I know it also helped the town and the county to kind of embrace it a little more, which is a huge positive for red wolves in that area. So we're always looking to further the benefit of that facility. To that end, we've done this remodel on the outside, so to speak, but we have been working on a remodel of the inside. The front portion of this building, like with that door you see goes in, it's a public, like a small visitor center interpretation area. It is operated by Kat Ramos and the North Carolina Wildlife Federation for people, and she's overseeing the interior remodel of that area as well. So we've put in new flooring. It's been freshly painted, some of the new displays, but there's going to be all new displays in there. So it's going to be an even it's an awesome building. It's been awesome since it was there, but it's going to be an even greater experience for people and a better learning opportunity, outreach opportunity. And there is an enclosure in the back there that there's a pen with a pair of safe animals from the safe population back there that the public can see. It's typically, and there's also 24-hour webcams that North Carolina Wildlife Federation operates. That folks can typically normally see red wolves there 24/7. Having said all that and how great it is, we currently have it closed because we are working on that enclosure to get ready for the next set of red wolves that will be moved into there. The ones that were there are no longer there. They've been transferred. So we will be getting new ones in. We're doing work on that pen to get it ready, and then it will be back open in mid-October. But we encourage folks to come out if they're in the area and to tell folks about it. Next slide, please. Collaborative community, or let's see, collaborative conservation. One of the main ones that we need collaborative conservation, of course, is landowners. And one way we're trying to do that, the CCT is going to bring them into the fold. We're going to hear from them more. We're going to talk about potential ways that, you know, it could benefit them, or potential ways that how we could work better with them for them to be more accepting of the red wolves and red wolf recovery program, those types of things. But one way is Pray for the Pack. A lot of you probably have heard of that. It's we sign up landowners and we provide financial and technical assistance to do habitat work that meets their land management goals. This isn't about us trying to get them to do something on their land with their habitat that to benefit to change what they want to do on their lands. We're not trying to talk them anything. This is goals that they have established for themselves, that if they do those, they also would benefit prey species for red wolves. So we'll provide financial and technical assistance for that. And in return, they agree to allow red wolves to be present on their lands unharassed, allow some level of monitoring by us, and then up to their comfort level, allow for coyote sterilization. Luke Lawless is the one that works with landowners to sign these agreements. There's also an option if you're not wanting to do habitat work, but you live within those 5 counties, that you can sign one that doesn't involve the money part of it. And you can just sign up saying, you know, you'll allow monitoring on your lands, you support red wolves or red wolf recovery program, and Luke can sign you up for that. Next slide, please. A couple of huge programs that we have that I want to bring to light. One is through the Red Wolf Recovery, excuse me, the Red Wolf Coalition is the depredation compensation program. Red Wolf Coalition funds it and administers it. And it's to reimburse landowners if there's loss of livestock from depredation by red wolves. I want to stress that depredation by red wolves is still extremely rare. It's happened 11 times in the 37 years since reintroduction. And a few of those, you know, I think 3 of those were just last year from one of the safe releases that was put in dire circumstances after her mate was a mortality. So it's very rare, but it's still a concern for landowners, and it's still something they worry about. So by having this program, it's a way to provide assurance to those landowners that if something happens with red wolves and their livestock, that they'll be reimbursed. So it's been a valuable program to have, and I do think it has helped increase the tolerance. Even talking about the presence of this program has helped. Next slide, please. Another key piece is the trapper reimbursement program. There's a lot of trappers out there. We're not asking anybody to trap for us, but if they're out there and they're licensed trappers and they're trapping already, we have this program to reimburse them if they catch a red wolf or a radio collared canine like a coyote, or a coyote that can be sterilized, collared, and released, or it's an animal they don't know what it is, and you know we suspect it could be red wolf that we weren't familiar with, anything like that. If they hand those animals over to us and they're live and releasable condition, then we can reimburse them for that. And that's a good way for trappers that come across one that has an orange collar or something like that to let us know. And some of the orange collared red wolves were caught by licensed trappers last year, and they did notify us and handed over those red wolf stuff. So it is a program that is very viable and working. I want to just throw some shout outs. Next slide, please. I want to throw shout outs to several of the organizations that we collaborate with, but beyond the private landowners. The SAFE program is a huge one. Emily went to it, so I'm not even going to take the time, since I'm way over, to go through all that. But they're an extremely valuable partner to us, and we try to be extremely valuable partner to them as well. Next slide, please. The Wildlife Resource Commission is, as Emily mentioned them again, we work very closely with them on all things canid management related within the Eastern North Carolina. And that collaboration has only increased in recent years. The wildlife refuges, you know, we're Fish and Wildlife Service, but we're a different department. We coordinate with refuges all the time on many levels, on multiple things for the benefit of red wolves. Next slide, please. I mentioned these partners already, but the North Carolina Wildlife Federation and Red Wolf Coalition help us out in a ton of ways by partnering with us on different things, funding opportunities, the Red Wolf Center, you know, the cost of coyote sterilization, those kinds of things. Next slide, please. Defenders of Wildlife is a good partner as well, and hugely helping out on a project to fence the transfer station that's adjacent to Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge. There's a lot of garbage over there, human garbage that is accessible to all wildlife, and it is a massive problem. And we have been working closely with Defenders and the county to solve that problem. And Defenders is doing a great job working towards that project. The Wolf Conservation Center is giving us they've given us $50,000 to help us towards GPS and VHF collars for red wolves and coyotes. That's a massive benefit. That allows us to use our limited funds on other aspects of red wolf recovery that are much needed. Next slide, please. North Carolina State University is a huge partner in so many ways. The veterinary hospital takes care if there's an injured red wolf for whatever reason. We know that they have dedicated both pen space funding and specialists to take care of those red wolves so they can be releasable to the wild. That's huge. I also am mentoring engineering students there that are working on some of the vehicle strike mortality. So that's a huge, and it seems like our ties with NC State just grow as the years goes on. So that's massive. The North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences is also a big partner. Red Wolf teacher ambassadors that we've had. We didn't have one this summer. It just didn't work out for various reasons, but we hope to do that again. It's local area teachers out on the refuge that talking to folks about red wolves and red wolf management, and then helping us do some of the management techniques like radio tracking and the remote sensing cameras. So they're a huge partner as well. And also they offer a program for teachers of North Carolina, and they bring them out and they teach them about red wolves so they can take that information back to the classroom, which is valuable for the next generation. All right, we're getting close, I promise. Next slide, please. So the next several slides, there's a lot of questions about how can people help, how can you get involved? And in a lot of ways, that's a difficult one to answer, but then there's also lots of ways you can. So I'm going to run through them faster than we'd like, probably. One way you can help get involved is contacting us directly if you have questions, concerns, or issues. Instead of speculating or listening to the rumor mill, you just contact us so we can help with that, and we can address your concerns directly. Next slide, please. Don't shoot collared canids. Know your species before you shoot. If you see orange, don't shoot. That should be sort of a hunter safety thing anyway, even if it's not a red wolf. But it's illegal to shoot red wolves. It is can result in civil criminal penalties and result in fines and forfeiture of the property that was used in the shooting. So just don't do it. It's likely to your benefit not to shoot a collared coyote because they're sterilized, and for all the benefits that I discussed earlier. And another one is to drive with caution in areas with red wolves. Just common sense. Next slide, please. Engage in red wolf meetings, planning meetings, or like that type of stuff. Participate in the CCT stuff that Emily talked about in detail within the red wolf recovery area, so your voice is heard. That's the way that you can do it. If there's meetings, if Francine's holding meetings, or once there's larger meetings of those types of things, participate in those. And invite the Red Wolf Recovery Program to come meet to your town or group like Mance Harbor did last time. So you can hear straight from us and answer your questions directly if need be. And then there's a nationwide process going on right now with wolves. It's kind of along the CCT lines. It's called the People's Process, a national conservation and about thriving communities, tribes, conservationists, working landscapes, and wolves. And they say we use crazy long names. That's a mouthful. But that project, like I said, it kind of it mirrors the CCT in some ways, but it's different. And it involves all wolves, Mexican wolves, gray wolves, and red wolves. And it's a 3-year project, and the objective is to convene people to address the long-standing conflict about wolves. And it's aiming to give a voice for all perspectives and not just be, agency talk about that, but to actually invite those voices to build a shared understanding, to determine the best path forward for wolves in general. Just opening up that conversation, having those group meetings, smaller group meetings, but it growing into a larger conversation across the country. And they're actually going to have, my understanding is they're going to have traveling meetings throughout the United States to have these meetings in person. They've had some online meetings, but it's going to grow. What the outcome is, we don't really know, because part of the thing about the CCT is you don't have a particular outcome in mind, because you want to get to that outcome with the folks involved. You're not dictating the outcome, you're building that outcome together. So that's one of the key things. The hope for having red wolves involved in this process is it will help inform all of this, both in North Carolina, but also, because it's a nationwide thing, to give us better insight and better information on potential new population sites, reintroduction sites, where it might be most successful, what we need to know in a particular area that we may not know yet. So, and if you're interested in being part of that, you can go to that. The website is peoplesprocess.com. Next slide, please. If you're sick of hearing me talk, just think how sick I am to hear me talk. So we're almost there. Another way you can help, if by visiting Eastern North Carolina and the counties that comprise the only wild population of red wolves, it helps support the economy of these local populations. The food, the gas, the lodging. People come here to see red wolves. It helps these counties, and it's sometimes hard to quantify that. But since COVID, especially, we've seen a steady increase of visitors on refuges, and a lot of that is to view red wolves. And it's no coincidence that to talk about that, I use the Keep Wildlife Wild logo, because we want people to come visit. We do. We want people to try to get a glimpse of a wild red wolf, but it needs to be done responsibly. It needs to stay at a safe distance. It needs to not habituate red wolves, because that's not going to be good for red wolves, the individual, the population, the program, the counties, anything like that. So seeing a red wolf in the wild is an amazing experience, but it has to be done ethically and at a distance, and maintained at a distance. And also, you can visit one or more of the 50 zoos and wildlife conservation centers that make up the SAFE program. They're a great resource of outreach and education, and you can see the animals in person and see how it works and what they're doing. And it's kind of fun, I feel, to go to the different ones. They all have a different approach to their habitats and what they look like, and how they're available for viewing. So I encourage folks to do that. Next slide, please. Another way you can help is to join Pray for the Pack. If you own land within this county, within these 5 county carries, you can pray for the pack, and you can contact us. And the next couple of slides, next slide, please, is our contact information for all of us. It's also available on our website. Again, the website is, well, that's on the next slide too, but it's the easiest way is redwolfcountry.com. But if you just do a search for the Red Wolf Recovery Program website and go to the one that's the Fish and Wildlife Service, you'll find it. Next slide, please. All right, this is literally the last slide. Hey, I'm smiling. So if you have questions that we don't get to, because there's no way we're going to get to, and again, I tried to incorporate all of the questions pre-talk into the talk, so that I made sure I cover that information. So I'm sure there's been 1,000 questions added to the chat since I have been talking. I haven't looked at them, but if you have questions that you think of later, or we're gonna put up the questions to the answers that are submitted. It won't be quick. Again, we're a small crew. There's a lot going on. October every month is crazy busy for us, but October, trying to get ready for trapping and acclimation pens is really busy. So these answers won't be up tomorrow, but eventually they'll be up. But if a new question comes to your mind, you can email us at redwolf@fws.gov, and there's the full website address. That's a little less easy to remember. And with that, I will turn it back over to Megan.
Thank you so much, Joe. And we will go ahead and actually turn it over to Emily for some closing remarks.
Okay, there we go. Even my computer is tired this late. All right, I won't take much of your time here. We appreciate your patience and staying with us this evening. We had a lot of information we wanted to cover. We wanted to make sure we incorporated the questions, the many questions that were submitted prior to the meeting, and prioritized presenting these key updates. We obviously are not going to get to questions, but we, like Joe said, we are committed to getting those questions answered in as timely a fashion as we can, since trapping season is coming up. Again, the recording of this meeting will also be posted on our website for people who had to step away. If you would like to provide feedback on this meeting, the meeting's format, we're always looking to improve and would appreciate your input. Again, we apologize for going long. If you think of questions after tonight's meeting, please feel free to submit those as well. You can send those to redwolf@fws.gov. I believe that was put in the chat. Thank you all once again for joining us this evening. Your engagement is critical to the success of the Red Wolf Recovery Program. We have many challenges ahead, but with collaboration, innovation, and a shared commitment, we are making progress. And through collaboration, we can ensure a brighter future for America's Red Wolf. Have a wonderful night, everyone. Thank you.